Greetings to all the learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is Globalization and Development Dilemmas, looking at migration as the case study of topic. In this lecture, we shall try to understand globalization and development with the focus on migration. We shall also look at theories of migration and present to you how all of it has a bearing with respect to issues of contemporary global politics. This lecture shall explain how globalization and development are linked to migration. International migration is a complex and diverse phenomena, and we shall discuss in this lecture that how theories of migration indeed demand attention with reference to understanding the topic. This lecture shall deliberate on academic and policy focus inputs to underline important issues to be addressed while explaining globalization and development dilemmas with reference to migration. International migration represents one of the most obvious contemporary manifestations of globalization. We take reference to the work of Alexander Bett's Global Migration Governance, Oxford University Press. In this work, this idea that when we try to visualize globalization, one of the most obvious image of it comes from how today international migration has made the shrinking of time and space possible for global world. However, when we try to understand migration, namely movement of people from one part of the place to another, one of the important lacuna concerning herein is that in world politics, there is lack of central governing authority. And we take this argument with reference to James and Brasenose work, Governance in 21st Century. In this work, the idea that dynamics of global governance need to be understood in the framework of lack of central governing authority. This indeed makes international migration as a diverse and complex phenomena. As we all know, migration has an important bearing with reference to globalization and development. However, no one single theory has been able to provide a satisfactory explanation or an encompassive understanding of issues concerning migration. That is why people migrate from one place to the other. Further, it is also good that because international migration can then better be understood by the diversity presented by various perspectives. To begin with, the neoclassical perspective, the neoclassical understanding with reference to migration, this theory assumes that labor markets and economies move towards equilibrium in the long run through trade and migration. It considers migrants as purely rational actors. Migrants move from societies where labor is abundant and wages are low to societies where labor is scarce and wages are high, as per the neoclassical perspective. Moving further, migration systems and networks perspective underlines that nexus between people at origin and destination. Migratory movements are often connected to prior long-standing links between people sending and receiving countries like commercial or cultural relationships. Then the other perspective comes from dual or segmented labor market. This perspective points out that the need for cheap workers, workers at less cost in modern societies is the main factor explaining Migration. From the world system perspective, migrants flow from the periphery to the core, while capital, machinery and goods flow from core to the periphery. As we are trying to understand migration, the dynamics of push factors and pull factors is also very important. Push factors are those associated with area of origin. What could push factors be? Overpopulation, few jobs, low wages. On the contrary, pull factors are those that are associated with area of destination. What could pull factors be? More jobs, better jobs, higher wages. As we are trying to understand migration with reference to perspectives, Ravenstein's laws of migration is very important to understand. This law quote and we present that most migrants move only a short distance. There is a process of absorption whereby people immediately surrounding a rapidly growing town move into it, and the gaps they leave are filled by migrants from more distant areas and so on until the attractive force, the pull factors, is spent. There is a process of dispersion which is the inverse of absorption. Each migration flow produces a compensating counterflow. Long distance migrants go to one of the great centers of commerce and industry. Natives of town are less migratory than those from rural areas. Females are more migratory than males as per the law, and economic factors are the main causes of migration as per Ravenstein's laws of migration. Further, Rayleigh's law of retail gravitation also explains issues concerning migration. In economics, Rayleigh's law of retail gravitation is a heuristic model developed by William J. Rayleigh in 1931. According to Rayleigh's law, customers are willing to travel longer distances to larger retail centers given the high attraction they present to customers. Stoffler's theory of mobility in terms of understanding with reference to migration argues that number of migrants from an origin to a destination is directly proportional to the number of opportunities at that destination and inversely proportional to the number of intervening opportunities between the origin and the destination. Everett Lee presented comprehensive theory of migration in 1966. The theory points out decision to migrate is a net result. It's an interplay amongst various factors. What could these factors be? As Everett Lee's theory points out, factors associated with the place of origin. Next, factors associated with the place of destination. Next, intervening obstacles. And last, personal factors. Migration theories can be classified according to the level they focus on. Herein, we can draw the distinction between micro level and macro level theories. Micro level theories focus on individual migration decisions, whereas macro level theories look at aggregate migration trends and explains these trends with macro level explanations. We all know that international migration has accelerated. As we are looking at migration, we take reference to a very important academic work by S. Castles and M. J. Miller, The Age of Migration, International Population Movements in the Modern World. This work points out that international migration has accelerated. Now, when we look at dimensions of globalization, namely rapid increase in cross-border flows of finance, trade, ideas, ideologies, knowledge, all of them have a bearing with reference to migration. So, therefore, these flows seem to reinforce each other. Further, as these flows seem to reinforce each other, migration is an important aspect. Acceleration of global migration, as the work points out, would have occurred along with a diversification of migration in terms of composition of emigrant populations, not only in terms of countries of origin, where temporary and permanent migration would increasingly coexist. Now, as we are looking at migration, we take reference to the work of J. Salt, The Future of Labour Migration, from International Migration Review, and the work points out that contemporary geography of labour migration reflects the globalization of the world economy and labour markets, in which an increasing number of countries have become participants in global migration systems. The work calls this, J. Salt calls that globalization of international labour migration. So, therefore, the sense we are getting in this debate as we are taking our studies forward, that globalization has transformed the nature of international migration quantitatively as well as qualitatively. And this change in quantitative as well as qualitative aspect of migration indeed has a huge bearing with reference to development. Now, as we are looking at development, international migration, that is movement of people across international boundaries, has enormous implications for growth, poverty alleviation in both origin and destination countries. We elaborate this perspective from the work of Dilip Ratha, Leveraging Economic Migration for Development, September 2019, from the World Bank. The work points out that migration poses challenge to migrants, the countries of origin and the destination countries. The rise in share in population in high income OECD countries from 10% in 2000 to nearly 14% in 2018. It has indeed led to concern amongst the policy makers. Migration is not a substitute for development at home, but as the work points out by Dilip Ratha, that it can be leveraged for development. Dilip Ratha, lead economist, migration and remittances and head of CONMAD, presented this work at worldbank.org. One must refer to that. CNOMAD, that is Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development. It is a global hub of knowledge and policy expertise on migration and development issues hosted by the World Bank. In the similar vein, wherein we are looking at Globalization and Development Dilemmas with the focus towards migration, we take reference to CONMAD's recent report, that is Remittances During COVID-19 Crisis, Resilient and No Longer Small Change. The work is by Dilip Ratha again, and the report points out that year after COVID-19 crisis, which was undoubtedly the deepest economic and health crisis in decades, the resilience and dependability that remittances present for families during crisis needs to be understood and underlined. Remittances sent home by international migrants have become a major source of external funding for the countries. Then, defying all the predictions, remittance flows have proved to be resilient during the COVID-19 crisis too. In 2020, officially recorded remittance flow to low and middle income countries reached $540 billion, only 1.6% below the $548 billion seen in 2019. Remittances exceeded foreign direct investment flows by a wider margin in 2020. Once again, we are quoting from the report. Further, as we are looking at issues of migration, one must also look at the very important perspective presented by Migration and Development Brief 34, Resilience, COVID-19 Crisis through a Migration Lens, and this can be read at nomad.org publications wing. Now, looking at the globalization and development dilemmas and quoting from the report, indeed internal migration, lockdowns, pandemic presented a huge challenge. So, herein we look at the World Bank report, that is COVID-19 crisis through a migration lens, Migration and Development Brief number 32. Herein, looking at issues of migration, lockdowns and pandemic, the magnitude of internal migration is about 2.5 times that of international migration. Governments need to address the challenges facing internal migrants by including them in health services and cash transfer and other social programs, and protecting them from discrimination is one of the important suggestions presented by the report. Further, when we are looking at globalization and development dilemmas, we take reference to the report Transit Migration Report, Migration and Development Brief number 29 from the World Bank, that is opening more legal challenges for migration to destination countries would help reduce transit migration. Further, the report points out that collaborative efforts amongst the origin country, the transit country and the final destination country to control transit migration, however, should not violate intra-regional movement of people under regional protocols. The report also points out that respecting the human rights of transit migrants indeed should remain a policy priority. As we are looking at globalization development with reference to migration, another important report that we get from the World Bank Group, Migration and Remittances, this is from April 2018, Recent Developments and Outlook, Migration and Development Brief number 29. Herein, we look at the important aspects, that is how today there is a need to look at migration as a very important issue concerning global politics. Dear learners, we are getting the sense that no doubt there has been surge of interest in the study of globalization, migration and development. When we are looking at migration, no doubt it is a defining phenomena of the globalized world. It is one of the defining parameters of development also. The challenge that comes here for the study here is information asymmetries, both in the process of development, information asymmetries in the dynamics of globalization. Further, what is essential here is taking reference to a very important work by Sansal Patrikaja, Domesticating the Giant, the Global Governance of Migration. The work is from Council on Foreign Relations. It's available online also. You must read to that. The author points out that there are three important issues, namely balancing security and freedom. Second, harmonizing international obligations with domestic laws. And the earlier image of migration, that is sending global south, there is a change. Earlier the focus was primarily in safeguarding rights of the citizens. Today there is a change here. Secondly, receiving global north also there is a change. Earlier the focus was only on accommodating the migrants and restrictions issues, and today no doubt there is a change. So therefore, shifts in global wealth distribution, this distinction is not that useful now, because one has to understand that countries that were once sending migrants are also receiving them today. Once again, we were quoting from the work of Sansal Patrikaja, Domesticating the Giant, the Global Governance of Migration, Council on Foreign Relations. Further, when we are looking at issues of global governance and migration, there is a debate that there are different norms applied. This deepens the gap between national and regional borders, weakening the prospects for effective and mutually beneficial cooperation. Further, that no comprehensive framework for handling migration has been developed at a global level because of lack of political consensus amongst the UN member states. When we look at the work of Sansal Patrikaja, there is the argument that is, no state can successfully manage migration alone. Further, UN member states should agree on normative framework for multilateral governance of migration. Then, United Nations should consolidate the global institutional architecture on migration. In the past 2 decades, no doubt there have been several global institutions that have developed varying capacities and expertise on migration. The Global Forum on Migration and Development today, as we take reference to important insights presented from the work of Sansal Patrikaja, that is, it coexists today with Global Migration Group of 22 UN entities, including International Organization for Migration, International Labour Organization, Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, UN development programs. International agreements, as the work points out as an important recommendation, should consider differences in national capacities while setting standards for sending and receiving countries. The work also points out that foreign affairs departments around the world should increase cooperation to improve consular capacities of states. Further, as we are looking at the important perspectives with reference to migration, one must understand that today migration is an important reality of the global world. This global world, which is marked by increase in speed, scale and intensity of movement of goods and services, is also marked by movement of people from one country to the other. This movement of people has been responsible for fueling development process also. However, these dynamics of globalization and development have not existed in isolation or in a vacuum. Globalization has transformed nature of migration, which has indeed had an impact on issues of development. When we look at globalization and development with reference to migration, There is the sense that today, with the increase in cross-border flows of finance, trade, ideas, knowledge, no doubt there are better chances of work, better wages, better opportunities. However, the other side of the crossroad, namely concerning security, freedom, accommodation, diversity, amongst others, cannot be ignored too. So, what is essential here is that one must look at migration with a comprehensive lens, that today migration has acquired a very important say with reference to globalization and development space. But at the same time, there are contestations to it, there are challenges to it, namely with reference to how both host and home countries have presented with reference to arguments that both sides have presented with reference to the way global migration system has worked. There may be issues, yet one cannot ignore how policy experts, expert reports point out that right from remittances to issues of migration, they indeed present an important avenue of development to be factored in the times of globalization. What is essential here is that the governments must address the challenges faced by migrants. At the same time, one must also understand that understanding of migration requires a broad overview, because migration within itself is a very diverse and complex phenomena. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture on globalization and development dilemmas with reference to migration presented you significant inputs, points of arguments, insights for the purpose of preparation for your competitive examination, research papers, higher studies, amongst others. No doubt there has been surge of interest in the study of globalization, migration and development. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.